Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Gatekeepers. I am Bishop-elect Vanessa M. Brown. I am your host and moderator for the evening. I'm so happy to be here with you on tonight on Beyond the Gatekeepers. We have a wonderful show in store for you. You know what I like to do as we move along on tonight. I like to hear from where you're from. I know I've been missing, or we have been missing. Last week we weren't here, but we're back again, and we want to give you a great show on tonight. So please, where are you watching from? Shout it out online so that I can see, so that I can shout you out as well. I'm looking for you to post. I see you here. New Jersey is here. Deacon Ayana is in the house. Thank you, Rhonda Curry Buckingham, for being with us on tonight. Blessings from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you so much. San Diego is here. Chino, California is here. And I know that more and more, Houston, thank you. Houston, Texas is in the house tonight. More and more people are going to come in. Remember, we can be found on 2 pages. We can be found on 2 pages tonight. We can be found on Bishop Yvette A. Flunder's page. We can also be found on the Beyond the Gatekeepers page. So if you're sharing, share. Remember, we're also on YouTube. And so we say hello and good evening to our Facebook family and to our YouTube family. I'm seeing you all are here from St. Louis. Yes. I'm loving Jacksonville, Florida, Oakland, California. Pastor Elizabeth Ann Jefferson is here with us on tonight. Louisville, Kentucky is here. We're glad to see you. Chicago is here. Sherry Capers, God bless you. Patterson, New Jersey is here. Southern California. Yeah, Chicago is always represented in the house. We're so glad about it. Boston, Massachusetts. Reverend Karen Coleman is here with us on tonight. And so we are blessed by your presence. We ask that you do us a big favor and share this conversation tonight. I know that I'm going to probably have Bishop Flunder do this. We're going to say a little bit about what's happened with the 21 people that are dead, and 19 of them are children. We dare not skate over that. Our author has a completely different book, but I believe that there's a thread that runs through as it relates to white supremacy. And so let me just move on further. I'm going to give you a few more minutes to tell us where you're from. Make sure that you are sharing the page for us on tonight, and we will prepare to introduce our guest. University of San Diego, somebody is here tonight. We're so glad for it. Reno, Nevada. Thank you for joining us today. Manteca, California. The West Coast is strong on tonight. So glad that you're here with us. We appreciate you so very, very much. And so we'll move on. And in our moving on, we will introduce our guests on tonight. And so tonight we have Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. He is an assistant professor of theology at the University of San Diego, but he's also one of the lead pastors at the Loft at Westwood United Methodist Church. And so we want to bring to you, he's an author, and the book that we're going to discuss tonight, and I need to be specific because he's written so many great, wonderful things, is The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice. Let me say it again so you can get ready to go purchase it. The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice. Please, to our audience, let us receive Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, please greet our guest on tonight.
I'm so grateful and honored to be here tonight from people all over, particularly my people in Southern California. Thank you for being here. But honestly, Bishop Brown, I'm excited to have this conversation. Most of the times I've been able to talk about my work, particularly as it relates to food. I haven't been able to discuss religion as much because it's been mostly about, looking at it from other perspectives. And so the opportunity to talk about how this is a theological issue is just really, really exciting. So thank you for having me here, and welcome to everyone who's listening today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Christopher. And certainly we cannot have this conversation without our presiding bishop, Bishop Yvette A. Flunder, who is our presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, and of course, the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California for over 30 years. Bishop Flunder, will you please greet our Facebook Live and YouTube audiences tonight?
Well, good evening, family. I am away from my normal digs where I would be right now, but I am in a wonderful position to speak with you, and lots of light on my forehead. I appreciate that. It is a great joy to be in the company of someone who is close to what I call the holiness of food. And I have said many, many times, and am writing a book that I have to share with you at some point, Dr. Carter, about the work that Jesus did at the table. In fact, for all intents and purposes, just about everything that we have recorded of him somehow or other has something to do with being in and involved with his followers and his disciples and the table in some way, from the Seder meal through the fish at the end of his resurrection, through the time he spent at Martha and Mary and Lazarus's house, and he had the reputation of being a glutton and a wine bibber. And I have gone so far as to say that his first miracle was to turn water into wine, and good wine. Let's just kind of put that out there too. So I think it's important to say that there was something about that coming together and the importance of our being concerned around and about food justice. And I'm very happy to be with you tonight. I'm also very aware that we are carrying in our bodies, in our cells, in our minds, and in our thoughts, yet again, the images and ideas of little children being terrified and being crucified, being killed and murdered yet again in this nation. And I know that it is the intention of those that are doing this and others who have talked about doing it. It is their intention to get the attention that is connected to this kind of heinous and dreadful reality. I don't want to talk tonight at all about those that are doing these kinds of things primarily to get attention. It's a sickness in and of itself. What I want to say in our opening is to the parents, the grandparents, the godparents, the neighbors, the friends, the other children who are also afraid and in terror because of what it is that is happening. What I want to say to you is keep looking up, as impossible as it may feel and as impossible as it may seem. Keep looking up, keep trusting. Prejudice, hatred, the serious pain that is associated with these kinds of experiences is not new to us, but it is fresh for the families, some of which have not even been able to identify their children just yet. We want to pray, and I'm going to ask if Bishop-elect Vanessa will allow me a moment so
Please.
that we can pray for these families and pray for this institution and pray for this city and pray for the rest of the kinfolks of the killer. Pray, pray, and pray for our nation and pray for those who would have the audacity to politicize this event yet again. Let's pray together and trust God. At the end of the day, what else can we do except trust in God? Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you honor and glory. We have a history as humankind of doing evil to each other. We have a history of war, history of famine, history of slavery, a history of abuse to women and children, a history of hating whoever was other by race, other by orientation, other by religion. We just have a history. But we believe today that in spite of and regardless to our history, that you, God, are still well able to move us forward into the realm of God, where your kingdom comes and your will is done on earth as it is in heaven. We know because we are still raw from the most recent atrocity of humankind's inhumanity to humankind. And we are praying tonight for the deep sorrow of parents who sent their children or dropped their children off to just another school day, and those children will not be coming safely home. We pray for the teachers who put themselves in harm's way and for their families. We pray for the school who will have to change perhaps how they interact. They will have to clean this up. They will have to try to restore and become a school again. How painfully difficult that must be. And so we ask you, overshadow our grief with hope. And we pray not only for those who were lost and those who have lost, but we pray for the angry and unfulfilled who are out there trying in some way to make a name for themselves at someone else's expense. We pray that you'll enter into their minds and into their thoughts, and that you will move them away from any idea and concept that somehow or other destroying lives gives them greatness. We will not call their names. We know who they are historically and presently. We will not call their names. What we will call is the sickness that they carry. Heal and deliver, O God. For thou, Lord, art a shield about us, our glory and the lifter of our heads. Heal and deliver, we pray. Heal, heal, and deliver we pray. In the strong name of Jesus, and in the name of all that is pure and right and just and divine. And finally, this: show us what good religion should be doing, even in a time like this. We bless you. Amen and praise God. God bless you, Bishop-elect.
Thank you so much, Bishop Flunder. I think that that is something that the people were waiting to hear. Just thank you. I'm going to move on from that space. But I am so very happy to have Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. And so, Dr. Carter, I just want to, for those that are listening in, we are discussing the book. And the name of the book, again, so that we can get it, is The Spirit of Soul Food. The Spirit of Soul Food. And we're going to be giving it away. It's The Spirit of Soul Food, Race, Faith, and Food Justice. We're going to be giving away a book. You know that you have to put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers in order to get it. And then Pastor Sue is also in the background. Thank you, Pastor Sue, for working tonight. And I believe Anthony Sullivan is also, Reverend Anthony Sullivan is up there as well, working, giving in the comments section and everything. Make sure that we put how people can purchase the book. Reverend Dr. Christopher was also so gracious enough to give us a discount code. And so if you want to purchase the book, you can do that as well. So we're grateful tonight for this discussion. I'm going to get started, Reverend Christopher, by just saying to you, so given the structural harms that we know are the current food system that we have as it relates to Black people and other people of color and poor people, what should soul food feel like today?
That's such, to me, was the animating question for the entire book project, right? When I sat down, and initially I did not I did not go to graduate school or to seminary to write a book about food justice. It just kind of it happened as I was having these moral conundrums where I felt like, okay, this is a theological problem for me. At its core, soul food should be about the preservation and promotion of community. At its fundamental core, that's what it has been, and I think that's what it is at its essence: the preservation and promotion of community, particularly communities of African descent. And because it is that at its core, what constitutes soul food has historically shifted over time based on access, production, based on location, and community. And so when we're talking about it within an American context, I would argue that the food we eat needs to be as anti-oppressive as possible, particularly as it relates to people of color. And so that means we have to recognize that our food system, particularly our animal agriculture food system, is rife with a kind of racialized hierarchy and racism and sexism. And as you said, with respect to the ways in which it marginalizes the poor, both domestic and global, that there's certain that we need to opt out of that as best as we can, that we need to try to find ways in which we purchase food as close to as possible to the actual farmers, so they can actually earn a living rather than having their wages exploited through the structures of capitalism that where most of the money goes to to corporate farmers. At its core, my hope is that we can move towards not only more local foods, which is essentially what I argue towards the end of the book, but that we recognize that this is a process, that's something that we have to move towards every day, that we make choices every day, and that we have to, for those of us like myself who are in a particular kind of space of privilege, who can eat a way that I think centers and makes and tries to be as, what I would say, anti-oppressive as possible, that we try to create the space and possibilities for other folks to be able to eat that way as well. And so, as I talk about in the book, I haven't always, I grew up just extremely poor. And so some of the suggestions that I make in the book, I note and I say this is impossible for poor people. So the question is, for those of us who are not poor, how do we work to create the opportunities and spaces for people to have access to this way of eating that fundamentally, I believe, is the essence of what soul food is and ought to be for the Black community, and particularly Black Christians.
Wonderful. Bishop Flunder, I know you have a lot to say about food justice, just based upon the work that you have done in City of Refuge. And so I want to give you this opportunity to say something as well.
Well, as you may well know, Dr. Carter, we've been involved in serving the communities round about us for a number of years. Um, food justice, food insecurity has been extremely important to us. And we have had, of course, pantries both in San Francisco and in Oakland where we acquire food and encourage people to come at least once every 2 weeks or so to get food for families, whole bags of food from everybody from bread providers to meat providers to folks that provide fresh vegetables and fruit. But I think the core of this, theologically, for me, is what has shifted and changed during the COVID, where families are working families now. These are not folks who are out there living on the street or living in tents or in broken down RVs. These are people who have jobs and they still cannot earn enough money to purchase food. And that is epidemic and surrounds us in the urban settings. And it brings many things to my mind. A lot of our food, of course, is coming from other countries. It took me a little while to figure that part out. That a lot of we're not the breadbasket of the world, you know. We're sort of the dust bowl, in a lot of ways of the world. And when you get strawberries from Ecuador, that says a whole lot, about what is really going on. And a lot of that has to do, as I see it, in not having access to uh, the jobs that um, have to do with growing and the farming in and around. Because it is in California, we talk a lot about folks not crossing the border, but we don't have a problem with folks crossing the border to pick and to be a part of work gangs, if you understand what I'm saying. And then they finish, and then they can go back. It's thought of as a unimportant sort of low position. And so in order to get most Californians to do something like that, you'd have to pay them a whole bunch of more money than you do the folks that cross the border. The argument is that it keeps food prices down. But the truth of it is the inflationary realities benefit the people at the top and never benefit the people at the bottom. I know you know that. I know you've written about it. What I most want to know, I think, is what do we do to flip this script? And I will say one thing that is very, very hard for me to say. But I and the folks that serve with me care for people for whom it almost seems that dying is the only way they're going to get out. Mm. They cannot seem to find a job. They cannot seem to find a place to live. And they cannot seem to find good, healthy food that will keep them, that will sustain them. And it almost seems as though the program is set up so that we will eliminate a certain segment, a certain percentage, by making it so difficult for them to afford not just baby formula, but difficult for them to afford apples, oranges, for them to afford cereal. Only thing they can really afford on $2 or $3 is some very fast food. That is the reality as I see it. So tell me, reflect with me, how does this impact you?
So there's a couple of things out. There's two ways I want to go about answering this question, and I'm going to first do a practical answer, but I want to put a pin in the fact that I think we need to also begin to confront this from a theological perspective. So that's what I want to say, because I think there's two ways we need to go about answering this question. So with respect to the practicalities of food or agriculture in America has always been wrapped up in systems of oppression and racism. That's why we were brought here that beginning with the indigenous genocide, like literally beginning with the clearing of indigenous folks to have land to cultivate. You begin the kind of racial project that is our agricultural system, right? And so I think from its foundations, the tentacles of racism are very difficult, or have been difficult for us to escape. And so because of that, there's always been this kind of stigma, a kind of a kind of hierarchy, again, placed on the ways we talk and think about food in America. And even though you will hear, Thomas Jefferson, or you read Thomas Jefferson, and other, folks that are involved in the Constitution, say things like, we need to protect the yeoman farmer. At their core, they're really trying to create systems that benefit those, what we would say today would be kind of the top 10%, economically within the country. And that really is what they were more or less trying to do, to preserve their particular kinds of rights. And so some of this, I think, from a practical standpoint, involves a kind of shift of consciousness with respect to the importance of food justice, food sovereignty, I would say, to Black folks, and particularly people of color broadly. Many of us, and I think this is especially important in light of the consequences of global climate change. Like that's part of the reason prices are going up. Among the reasons prices are high has to do with just the extractivist nature of capitalism, and the way in which we allow food to be seen as a commodity that one could make profit on in that way, which again is a problem. We think about the fact that people need food to survive, I would argue, right? But the other thing is it does cost more to grow food because of global climate change, because we are more or less living in a system where we're allowing, we've created a system that is harming, and it continues to harm the planet. And so that's one part. And again, the way I would argue we need to begin to address this from a practical standpoint, and what I suggest towards the end of the book, is how do we go about trying to create, particularly as religious institutions, what I call like food sovereign communities. This is difficult. This is more difficult for urban areas, places like where you are in Oakland or the Bay Area, or even to a certain extent where I am in San Diego. Because what we have to be able to do is create and try to facilitate relationships, like direct relationships, as you were talking about, that you all do with people who grow food, farmers and food producers, to where we can provision foods where at our institutions, where we are just trying to cover the cost of paying people to be there to actually distribute it, but not trying to, capitalize on in the ways in which that historically it's been capitalized on. How do we shift our ministries to a ministry not only of preservation and promotion of community? And we need to understand right now, food security is so crucial for us right now. And so that requires a shift from a practical perspective, it requires a shift of intention, rather than thinking about the goal of our churches are to just recruit folks to come and worship, to grow our numbers, and whatever other reasons people might have. Justice, service, and love needs to be the orienting compass, right? That informs the work that we do. And seeing how important that food is right now, I would argue it is the way we need to be concerned about providing folks. So right now I'm currently in Michigan. That's where my family settled. And it's different here because there's just so much more space, right? I mean, I'm in West Michigan, I'm outside Grand Rapids. And so there are churches I work with here that have turned their church land into farmland. And that is something that I believe we definitely need to do in places like this, where we can actually begin to grow food, pay people to actually grow the food, right? So they can have a sustainable job. Because the thing is, I know you mentioned that you have to pay people a lot of money to do the kind of picking. That kind of labor isn't farming. That it literally is picking. It's the kind of work that my grandfather did growing up when he worked in the fields. My grandfather wanted to be a farmer, but in America, Black folks were always meant to work the land, but never to own the land. And I think that and once you get some land, as Fannie Lou Hamer showed us, like it's hard to keep that land. People try to take that land away from you. And we see that still being played out today with Black farmers in America. So the acquisition of land, the use of land to actually grow food, or using the land we already have, right? We don't need to grow grass. Like we just like not when you can actually grow things that actually can serve a purpose and feed people. And so I think it requires just a reimagination and some imagination of how can we use what we have to serve folks. And again, this is more difficult. I want to be clear. I know this is more difficult for urban spaces, but what my friend Heber Brown does with the Black Church Food Security Network, again, I'm sure y'all know, like Heber, who I've worked with a bunch, has just, he's in Baltimore, he's in an urban setting, and he's connected with those farmers, and they have a very good system there that I believe, that I'm hoping, that I am planning on. I mean, to be quite honest, Heber and I are working together to try to replicate that in other places, because I believe that's just, I think it's crucial for our survival as Black people, as people of color. Like I honestly, genuinely feel like in the next 30 to 40 years, because of global climate change, we need to be shifting and thinking about things this particular way. I'll let you ask another question, because the guy could talk about the theological stuff. I know there's probably other questions we can get to there later, but that was such a great question. And for those of you who don't know, the Bay Area is going through it's just, I mean, it's expensive to live everywhere. It's insane to live where you all are. And so it's particularly difficult there, right? Like, because of cost of living is so absurdly high. And how do we actually put systems in place this is why I talk about food as a way to get at other issues, right? Like housing, like that's a big, people have to have a place to live. Like, how can we create and think about the ways and importance of creating minimum, to create social services that provide for people. So again, lots to say about that, but thank you for that question. Hopefully that was a decent answer, and we can continue to workshop it.
Indeed. Shout out to Dr. Heber Brown and the Black Food Security Network. We work with him. Bishop Flunder's worked with him. He's preached for us before, and it's wonderful. His work is wonderful.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
Indeed.
There's one other little thing too that you made me think about. When cannabis was made legal, and the distribution of cannabis became a huge, big business. Not that it wasn't a business before it was legal, but I must say that it became a real big business in California. Something very akin to what it is that you're talking about in terms of the history of getting always the last seeds in the bag, and always the last opportunities, and all the realities of people of African descent, not supposed to be able to own, but to work the land. Such a good point, because the license and the land to grow cannabis, at the point at which cannabis became legal in California, and there were people of color who went out to seek to get a license, a grower's license, and to acquire land. In almost every incident, when they got there, everything was gone.
That's right.
That the decisions were all made. Now, I want to connect that to your point about we should be about using the land. Everybody was saying we don't have land to use. We don't have fertile land to grow. Well, when cannabis licenses became available from the mysterious ether of some place, we suddenly had land all over the place to grow cannabis. And so all of the roadblocks that are in the way are just that. They are roadblocks. They are not real. They are Memorex. But by the time we get to it, by the time we see ourselves as being part of it, so much of the lion's share of good and fertile opportunities in land is gone. And what remains are the pickings, getting on the front of it. And I'm interested to know even what our audience feels about this too. Getting on the front of acquiring land for green purposes, getting on the front of that is going to take some real effort. And I have also found that a lot of us have family members who died owning land. And our folks did not know about trusts and wills, and they had life insurance policies. And some of them had life insurance policies that go back 40, 50 years. And they died. And each of those insurance policies and land holding policies are still connected. The way it works with an insurance company is that when they fold, they give it to another one. And that one folds, they give it to another one. And that one folds, they give it to another one. But if they ever paid it off, it's still worth something. And if they ever owned the land,
It still
then
works.
the land is still worth something. So
Right.
part of what I think we should do as African Americans and people of color and people of concern is start, you know how they have these places where you can go and like I have many times and find out who your great, 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 great grandfather was.
Ancestry.
I think that one of the things we should do is mobilize some Black attorneys and see if we cannot find out what do we own that we don't know that we own in
That's
our
good.
own genealogies. So I want to put that out there too to some of our folks that are listening tonight.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Bishop Flunder. Reverend Dr. Christopher, I have two questions. The first question is, how might we eat in ways that preserve and promote the flourishing of Black communities and critique white supremacy? That's just one question I want us to dwell on. And then Anthony Sullivan has asked me to ask you this question: how has soul food preserved Black history? And so you can decide which one you want to go with first.
Ooh, Anthony's question is very good, so I'm gonna go with that first. I did have a couple of things that I hope can get posted on in the various platforms that we're using,
Of course.
based on Bishop Flunder's comment. One of my colleagues, a friend of mine, Jillian Hishaw, who's a lawyer, has two excellent books about the ways in which the United States government quite honestly stole land from Black farmers. It's called, she has a brief edit because she's very thorough. So she has one really long version of the book and a condensed version of the book. And so I'll put links up there for both. And I think both of these texts will help us understand how we got to where from 1920 to 1995. I want to say we lost, if we count the amount of land Black people owned at 100, we went down to where now we have about 15 to 20% of the land we used to have. So 80% of the land that Black people used to own has been more or less either taken or stolen. And this is why I talk about churches using the land that they have, because that's really important for us to use what we already have in order to leverage it to buy more land. Now, with respect to the ways in which soul food has preserved Black history, that is, I think, crucial. So one of the things that we have to understand, that I argue for in the book, or not even argue, I guess I should say just explain and tell, is the primary reasons we've often been told as Black people, the reason we were enslaved is because we were like docile and very hard workers. And there's some truth in the ways in which we were very hard workers, refused to believe that the docility, I know that's not to be the case. The truth is, when you look at the records and the records that enslavers kept, is the primary reason we were enslaved is because, well, two reasons. One, as Black people, we were distinct from the European colonists. And so they would know that we were technically of a different group of folk, so they could actually track us as opposed to using indentured servitude for white folks. And two was because of our agricultural and animal husbandry acumen. Basically, just like the indigenous folks, they needed Black folks to teach them how to grow food in this particular kind of climate, because it was so different than Europe. So literally, when people talk about, we as Black people have helped build America, you can also add to feed America in that same kind of language. And so when you're looking at the rice growing techniques that are used in South Carolina, the agricultural and irrigation techniques that are used in the Carolinas and Florida and Georgia, the animal husbandry techniques used in Texas and Oklahoma, all these practices can be traced back to specific tribes in Africa, right? And so what happened is, one of the more difficult parts for me for writing this book is reading some of those first person notes that these enslavers had. And what they would say is like, hey, if you are growing this kind of crop, you want to buy Africans from this tribe, and they sell them at this port during this time of year. Like, they were that specific. And so when I was meeting with and working with Dr. Ibrahim Asek, who is the academic at the Whitney Plantation, there you go, in Louisiana, he kept saying over and over, because I was like shocked when he was telling me this. I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. He's like, Christopher, we are an agricultural people. He's like, he's like, that's why we're here. It's because we are farmers. And so some of this requires I think a rehabilitation of the ways in which we think about the land, a healing, so we don't see the land as something that ties us to slavery, but actually something that's a part of the essence of who we are as Black people, as people of African descent. And in this sense, soul food, the foods that we were able to create out of those particular kind of techniques, have lots of Africanisms in them. Another text you can look at, which was made into a Netflix documentary, High on the Hog, really kind of traces the roots of some of those kind of culinary practices that we inherited and brought over with us.
It was very good, very good.
And I think that is those kinds of documentaries, and I would say the book is even better than a documentary. I mean, my book does a pretty good job of trying to trace those connections as well, where we can begin to see that much of what we eat in the ways in which we eat still is distinctly West African. That if we go to different parts of West Africa, you see what we would call soul food present today. And so in that sense, I think what requires is almost like a inversion of the question, is learning how our food still is connected to West Africa and can help us understand that kind of connection so we can reconnect to it, right? And so I think is deeply crucial. Now to your first question, you said with respect to what does eating in a way that preserves and promotes community today look like? What I argue for in the book at the very end is something called soulful eating. Now, for me, I call that for me is a practice of what I call Black veganism. Now, Black veganism for me, or as I define Black veganism, is distinct from basically white veganism or white women veganism, however you want to frame it, because most of the time when you think about veganism, that's usually what they think about in terms of being vegan for the animals. What I make pretty clear in the book is the logic that normalize racism, the dehumanization of Black people, is a part of the same logical structure, the same thought structure that allows us to have created the animal. Essentially, the ways in which we talk about animality and anti-Blackness are all tied together. These things are distinct within the structures of white supremacy. And so I use the term Black veganism to talk about the ways in which we opt out of eating animals as it means to resist white supremacy and to make explicit that we are opting out of a functional system that's been used to normalize anti-Black racism. And I talk about this as what I call ontological. And so that just means, even though I know everybody can't be vegan, especially Black folks, because of the structures of the economic structures in our country, we all can try to eat in ways that make explicit or that explicitly resist as best we can where we are white supremacy within our food systems. And so how do we create spaces for people to do that? How can people continue to find ways, even within their limited means, to eat in ways that do that? And how can churches be involved in creating those spaces to do that? I think is extremely crucial. Now, part of the reason that I talk about what I believe I'm trying to do in opting out of killing or opting out of animals, consuming animals, is what you would call kind of a veganism for the people, right? So it's not, I mean, as I was telling the people earlier, my wife is a veterinarian. I love animals. Animals are great, but my veganism isn't about, it's not really about animals. It really is about the ways in which these factories and these systems exploit and marginalize people of color. Like when you look at, there was an article that I referenced in the book where the Smithfield plant in North Carolina, in the city of Smithfield, North Carolina, how the workers there, the people who had the worst jobs were the Black ones, right? So they had the Black women cleaning pig intestines, right? They had Black men doing all the heavy slaughter work. They had the Mexicans, doing something slightly better than them. And they had this kind of racial hierarchy. And so my hope is that we can eat in ways that allow us to not be complicit in that system, and also try to think and live and be in ways that promote a kind of anti-oppressive culture. Because I do believe, and I talk about this throughout the book, that we are called to be a people of compassion and love. It's how can we, again, eat in ways that are compassionate. And I believe ultimately this is how we practice the essence of preserving and promoting our community. Because not only does those eating animals, I believe, or the logic that normalizes the killing of animals is tied within the logic of anti-Black racism. The people who live by those, who work in those factories are Black. People who live in those spaces are Black. Like, we're disproportionately impacted by all that stuff. And so as best as we can, as I say, I think we should opt out of those systems. So that is kind of the Cliff Notes that hopefully gets people at least interested in the book, if not somewhat skeptical, but that's okay.
I like the concept of Black veganism, but I'm just wondering, in the same fashion in which people cannot afford healthy food in communities, particularly urban communities, as you spoke of, Oakland, Harlem, all of these places, Brooklyn, how are they going to be able to afford to be vegans?
So this is the interesting, I won't say myth, but I guess the reality. Being a vegan isn't expensive in the sense of the stuff that I buy. Actually, I would say it's pretty cheap. What you need to be as a vegan is you have to have time to cook, Bishop Brown. And I would tell you that practically, to me, is the ask. So in the book and in other places, I can outline how the things I buy, and I would consider, I mean, you see I have recipes in the book. I consider myself a pretty good cook. Nothing in that book to purchase is actually all that expensive, but what it requires is time. It requires time that my grandmother had, right, to actually have time to cook. And I would argue one of the challenges that we have living in a capitalist society is that we don't actually have time, because when you're cooking fresh food, you actually have to prepare them, right? Like you have to prepare them. And so some of this, I should also say, not only is it time to cook, it also, for some of us, requires reclaiming the kitchen as sacred space, as a space of storytelling, as a space of remembering our ancestors who taught us how to cook these particular kind of ways, so we can look at the kitchen as something that brings us joy, as opposed to something that feels like a chore. So often in our society, we're taught to believe cooking is a chore. And so I actually would argue that is the most difficult part of what I'm asking people to do. The economics of it is more about access. And so people who suffer from food apartheid, not only do they have difficulty accessing what I would say you need to be a vegan, they have difficulty accessing food in general. And so for me, that is a broader issue of, we need to also be addressing access and addressing food apartheid and the history of redlining. That's a part of what I'm arguing with Black veganism, but that's why then I talk about three different aspects. The second part of what I'm arguing for, seeking justice for food workers, explicitly talks about the ways we need to be activists in our communities to try to really address issues of food apartheid. And that should then allow people to be able to have a more healthy diet. But all three of these things are kind of, I would argue, deeply tied together. But again, just to wrap up, cooking to me, I think that's been the challenge. I mean, I don't know how that resonates with y'all, how y'all feel about it, but that's something I was saying doing these talks. That to me seems to be a thing. People are like, I don't know how you have time to cook all this stuff. And that is a challenge.
Bishop Flunder?
I think always of our palate, as people of African descent, and especially because we were mostly raised on what was left. As I say all the time, we made a delicacy out of everything that was on the edges of a pig.
Yeah, the low end of the hog.
Low ends. Yeah, the pig ears, pig feet, the chitlins, the hog maw, the snoot, the head cheese, all of those things, and delicacies in many ways. And our lives were very, very physical, and some of the eating did not take a toll on us. Our lives have become less physical. And the end result is some of the kind of eating that we did when we got what we could get has not been helpful to us, and isn't helpful to us. So it's about also a relearning. It's about loving the moment as it relates to and the holiness and the wholeness of food preparation and sitting with one another, but is also moving to another way in terms of our palate, what it is that we really, and then there's a shift and change in availability. My grandmother was a slow cooker. She cooked, she creamed her butter for pound cake with her fingers, with a bowl between her knees. If you understand, you may know what I'm talking about. But she had time. She sifted her flour, she had time because she was in that reality where women were at home and they prepared food, and their husbands went to work, and then the kids came home and got to some degree involved in the work, but not the kind of work that their mothers and grandmothers did. Well, society has shifted so much of that. Just to survive, most people have to have two people working. Everybody got to go to work, so that kind of shifts the way that we were. When we take your thoughts and ideas, and then alongside that, craft the reality that we do have a more sedentary life than our kinfolks, and craft also the reality that whose job it is to do this, who's responsible to be the one who stays home and does the cooking. In the present economic realities, we have to weave those things into what does it mean to be healthy, and where can we go, and can we afford to buy it if somebody else makes it.
Yeah, no, I think
You understand what I'm saying.
you raised so many excellent points. I mean, I was fortunate enough to grow in a house where, again, my grandmother did quite a bit of the cooking, and my stepfather did, and so I inherited that from them. And I was fortunate to be in a place where my grandmother allowed me to be in the kitchen, or I should say, if I was going to be in the kitchen, I was going to be helping. If I couldn't just be in the kitchen and be in the way, that And so, because
Says all about grandmothers.
exactly. And so for me, because I've always liked to eat, I didn't mind helping because that's just, I've always liked to eat. And so that's where I gained some of my skills in the kitchen. And the other part, and I put a link in the chat to a friend of mine, Bryant Terry, because you mentioned palate. And what I had to learn how to do when I stopped eating meat, I had to really learn how to cook and how to actually season food, because so much of our, because of what meat does to our palate. And so I want to just be clear when I'm talking about this. I did a lecture at the University of California, Irvine, where my dad's family is from Hammond, Louisiana. And there was an older Black woman there from Hammond, Louisiana. And so in this lecture, this culinary class, they actually cooked every recipe in the book that I have. Because I have all these vegan soulful recipes in the book for people who don't know. And people were eating them. She put every dish in a single bowl because she wanted to taste each one separately to make sure to see how it tasted, because she knew my dad's family was from Louisiana. And a lot of the recipes it's more Louisiana than Mississippi soul, to be quite honestly, but that's just being super specific. So anyway, she eats the foods, and afterwards, she's the first person to raise her hand. And I didn't know who she was. She raised her hand. And she's telling me about where she's from. And she's like, I separated all the foods. And I'm honestly thinking she's going to tell me this food does not taste good. And I'm nervous about it because, I didn't cook it. And so my thinking is, okay, I can deflect maybe and talk about it and prepare it. But she loved it. She's like, this really tastes like the stuff I grew up with. This tastes like the food I ate growing up. And so I'd be lying if I didn't say I didn't have to work at figuring out how to replicate some of these tastes. And so it's possible, and it did require some work. But you're right when you say like our palate. You do have to, when you eat this way, you have to figure out how to make it taste in a way that feels like home, and that requires some experimentation. Bryant Terry has done, I think, an excellent job in doing some of that experimentation for us. And so I use a lot of my recipes built off him and a few other vegan chefs that I like. And I think that's important. One thing you alluded to, Bishop Flunder, that I want to be clear to: food justice is an issue. If you care about issues of gender equity and gender justice, food justice should be at the top of your list. Because women are the people who are exploiting this. When you talk about who's going to be home cooking, it's often the woman. Who's going to have to pick up the extra things is often the women, right? And so this is, and for those of you who don't know, the majority of farmers globally in the world are women. Women produce most of our food. So this issue is profoundly connected and related to issues of gender justice. And so when we're talking about providing better pay for farm workers or better access to land for farmers, it's more often than not women, even though women, when you see and think of a farmer, you think of men, or particularly white men. But globally, that is just not the case. And so getting back to your point about trying to take seriously the practical realities of people's situation, I know that, and I think the work that I've been able to do, particularly in the communities that I served in Compton, has given me the confidence that what I'm asking people to do is to plan out as best they can for what they're doing, on a day-to-day basis. And so what I found for people in my church in Compton who were poor, because this is all, I developed this when I was a pastor. Like before I wrote the book, I was putting this stuff into practice, and the book kind of came out of that. What many of them would do is maybe 2 or 3 days a week, they would have time to cook, usually on Saturdays or Sundays. And that food, however long it lasted, they may have to eat out or do other things for other days, or they wouldn't eat in the same kinds of ways. But for them, what I told them is I didn't want to shame them. They didn't have the time to do things every day. I was like, it's not about that. It's doing what you can every day to make a step, to make the next practical steps, right? To eat in ways that actually allow you to feel full, to feel nourished, and hope that the following week or the following days that things are able to get better every day. And then I put the onus back on people, like, again, myself. Like, how are we working to change these systems? Now, I can tell you, the work we did in Compton has a food market now where they didn't have a farmer's market before. They actually now have a grocery store in the community. They didn't have a grocery store before. And these are things I was involved in 2010 to 2012, or 2012. And so it took some time, but some of these things have begun to change in that space. It's going to take time. It's going to take work, but I'm telling y'all, this can be done because I've seen it be done. And we have to be in it for the long haul.
I wanted to say, just a quick thought before the audience is asking questions. I want to get to them, but just a quick thought. And as Bishop Flunder sits there, two things. The first thing is that you and Dr. Heber Brown should do a food justice tour, and you all should turn it into a documentary. Okay. And we can discuss that offline. I know you said, where we going to get the money from? But, hey, somebody is listening. There's always some money to do something, right? So here's a question from S.L. Jenkins. And her question is, can we discuss the current covert racist acts of creating food deserts in communities of color to force residents out for gentrification purposes?
Yes, we can. And so there's an excellent book by Mark Winnie called Closing the Food Gap that begins to draw these through lines that she's gesturing towards with respect to the history of redlining, the removal of supermarkets and grocery stores to impoverish a community. And then as that community moves out, again, gentrification begins to take place. And then all of a sudden those services come back, and people who even still live in those places are now being forced out. And so food becomes a weaponized, right? In this sense, you especially see this happening in Chicago, because that's one place where it is happening. Like as we're speaking right now in Chicago is one place where I would say, with at least the communities I'm connected with there, where this is a kind of gentrification or that you see taking place. Ways to resist it now are really to try to get ahead of it. And so when you have developing communities, like how do we create, again, co-ops? How do we create to address food apartheid ourselves rather than trying to rely on outside agencies, so that then you don't have the same kinds of incentives for other folks to come in and, again, take our land. So much of this stuff is around land. And this is why I think, again, that point to systematic land theft is so crucial for us to understand why this is happening. Because now that you see people moving back to cities, the people who are, again, being marginalized are those of us who've already been there. So, I mean, racism is the through line through all of this. Let's let me be clear. Like it all ties to it's racism, and so that's such an excellent question. And I want to thank that person asked that question for naming it, because some people don't draw those connections between what's happening in the housing crisis and how it really can be traced back through the ways in which food has been weaponized to create the kind of crisis we have.
That's good. Bishop Flunder, you want to say something?
There's a couple of things, and that is that, it is no accident that fast food and poor food proliferates in communities of color more than anywhere else. It's just, and the way that a lot of our food has been priced out. Essentially, the places where you can go and get the kind of food we're talking about, the prices are ridiculously high. Not because it's ridiculously high to produce the food, but I think it is done that way so that we are not feeling that we can afford to eat that way. Let's just put it that way. So I think that there's an intention. And one of the other things that I remember was being in the Midwest during the time that Flint was having the water crisis. And I think you might have been with me, Bishop Vanessa. But I remember going to Flint for an event, and there were water bottles everywhere, getting bottled water because
I remember.
remember that? Because
Yes.
of what was happening with the pipelines, and that it was that the pipes that were the most degraded and were creating the illnesses that people were having were, of course, the pipes that were majorly in communities of color, and more specifically among Black folks. And it opened up a conversation that goes all the way back to like when my father, my birth father, came home from the Korean conflict with the GI Bill, but no neighborhood to buy a house in. He had the GI Bill, but nobody would sell to him because they wouldn't sell. That was the back end of the problem. And a lot of our people were given housing opportunities in neighborhoods that leached, that had leach chemicals underneath the ground. It is the same reality of the encroachment of fast food restaurants in communities of color. All of those things are connected in my thinking. And the intention of giving the leavings, the leftovers, the least to certain communities, because it's not a big deal if those communities are affected,
Right.
As it relates to. So then the statistics about illness in our nation has these same communities severely disproportionately present in every conceivable kind of illness. And now what has been added to the list of illness is gun violence. How about that? As an illness, as something that disproportionately kills, and particularly communities of color. So this is a very broad conversation with realities that connect us in many, many ways about how we need to push back against being made deficient by virtue of the way that we are treated externally. That we are not deficient internally, but we have been pushed into a deficient corner by the ways in which we have been treated, and we need to address that. That as our brother, Dr. Christopher Carter, is addressing it head on in
Head
his.
on.
Let's call it what it is. We have been poisoned on purpose.
On purpose.
Let's call it what it is.
And white supremacy and racism is at its root.
At the root from the very beginning. Our deaths didn't matter, and they don't matter anymore. They give you diabetes medicine before they ever know that you have it.
That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're
absolutely right. 100%. You can walk into the doctor's office right now and be a Black person, be a Black woman, and be a little bit overweight. And before they, it's a prejudice, because before they start asking you questions, they already assume, and it's not just white doctors. Some brown doctors do the same thing. They automatically assume, especially if you have to go to a clinic, that you have diabetes and high blood pressure. And when you say, I don't have diabetes and high blood pressure, their eyes literally almost pop out. Yeah, I don't have high blood pressure and I don't have diabetes.
Or heart trouble.
Or heart trouble. Let's move along.
Right.
So one of the things that I think, so I shall say one thing about the gentrification piece, and I want to mention that I failed to mention before is, and I talked about how we could begin to address that by reforming and working with the actual mom and pop stores that are already in those communities. And so I'll put a link in there from the Los Angeles Food Policy Council. And pretty much all major cities have some kind of food policy council. The power they have varies from city to city, but LA is doing a great job of actually helping neighborhood markets basically reshape themselves to sell healthy foods. And so people, the organizations like this that are doing that kind of work. So I want to point to them and point out one that I think is doing excellent work. the point that you're talking about with respect to how we are, the prejudice that's in place that's allowing doctors and other folks to dehumanize us. What I do in the book, I try to connect this. I talk about how this is a theological problem, and essentially I call this a problem of theological anthropology. And what this means is fundamentally the assumption we often have, even as people of color, about what it means to be human is wrapped up in whiteness. It's wrapped up in a kind of white performativity. It's wrapped up in not only whiteness, but heteronormativity, right? It's wrapped up in a particular kind of class kind of consciousness, a kind of ableism, and obviously a kind of sexism, right? And so when you add all this up, when people have the assumptions about, when they say, well, we have to be treated like humans or see us as human beings, our version of human, I have been arguing in the book, is often flawed. When we think about, when we say, I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to be treated as a human if your version of human is a product that's been developed through a kind of lens of white male patriarchal supremacy. That is not the kind of human we ought be. And so we have to reimagine what it means to be human in the ways that emulate the person of Jesus. And so Bishop Flunder, as you said in the very beginning, it's not surprising that Jesus would use food as at the table, I should say, as a way to create these conversations and in a way to create relationships, because the table represents a space of boundaries. And what you see in the ministry of Jesus is the breaking of boundaries, these kind of rigid boundaries that were confining folks from actively cultivating a kind of solidarity with other people, right? And so my hope is that we can begin to reimagine what it means to be human in ways that are anti-oppressive, in ways that pull people towards love, in ways that allow us to heal the trauma that we carry from our ancestors, right? From our enslaved ancestors, the traumas that we carry from the land, right? And to create a kind of relationship with each other, with ourselves, with God and the land that can be about healing. And this, I believe, is the theological conundrum that we are entrapped in, right? Because we often don't know how to relate to or talk or think about creation as such. We see it as something distinct from us. Whereas within, I would say, the life of Jesus, we have said, well, we are bound up in creation. We are a part of creation. There is no separation of human and nature. We are a part of nature, right? And so remembering that, I think, allows us to create the kind of intimacy that's important and should move us to redefine what it means to be human in ways that can be about love, justice, and solidarity.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Christopher. Two more questions, if you don't mind. And I think you already touched on this, but I want to ask it the way that they asked it. Colette Walker says, what are some of the ways we can begin to help heal the distrust, disgust, and complicated relationships some of us, our elders especially, have with the land?
Yeah, and so I did a little bit. I addressed it. There's an article I have in a book, the Bloomsbury Handbook of Religion and Ecology. It's called "Blood in the Soil," where I explicitly talk about that trauma, right, that we have with respect to growing. And I tell the story about a boy who I was working with to try to get to join the garden club. And his reaction to me saying, "I want you to be in the garden club," was to say something to the effect of, "Are you trying to make me a slave?" Like his whole connection to anything but the land was about slavery. And so some of this, I believe, requires us to recognize that our history with land and agriculture doesn't start with slavery. It starts with our ancestry, right? That it is deeply African. It's a part of who we are. And I think in that sense, it could be a kind of healing, of reconnecting to the essence, right? The core identities that have been stripped away from us. So I believe that's one way we can begin a healing. And the other thing that I think we have to do is actually talk about this as a community, particularly in religious spaces, to talk about nature in ways in which we aren't alienating ourselves from it, to spend time in nature, to worship in nature, to actually be in that space and to allow us to feel connected to it once again. And again, this is difficult for those of us who live in urban spaces. And so you have to be intentional about going to parks and taking vacations at national parks and doing things like that. But I believe those are kind of some of the things we can be doing to cultivate a healing. So those are just two things I would say. There's a few other things to do, but those are two things that kind of jump to mind.
I'm amazed to some degree at the way the city has taken the land out of us. You know, it's interesting, and sometimes, so here's a flunderism. When I go overseas, you know, and I get among people who don't live in urban settings, not at all. And the way that they move and the way that they talk, um, and the way that the air smells, and the things that matter and the things that don't, And then I realized that there's a certain sanitizing of our connection to the land that happens. And when I'm working with homeless people, housing insecure people, the people who are the most capable of surviving being homeless and housing insecure are the ones who try to habitate the parks where there's dirt, and grass. And they live so much better on grass and dirt than they do on concrete,
Concrete.
because it's alive. It's a totally different thing. The first time I went into deep, deep rural places in countries, the things that I smelled made me think, Jesus, God, what is that? And I realized it was because I had not experienced fertilizing food with, the ways in which they fertilize food. I think you understand where I'm going with
I
that.
do know where you're going. No, I do. I do. I
Hey,
do.
is a whole, and then trying to put that together with they gonna eat that, trying to get a connection to the land again. Um, it's going to be a challenge and something that we have to do with today's thinking on our minds. And it's so good to hear someone who's substantially younger than me having this conversation today about how we might get reconnected. Our community needs it. My daughter is very similar. My 45-year-old child is very similar in her thinking to your thinking, Dr. Carter, about the importance of this connection, us not losing this connection. It's very, almost vegan, very involved with the earth and concerned about the earth. She reminds me a great deal of you, but it has so much to do with taking back what was taken from us. And then we got to get our noses got to get ready for it, because your nose is not prepared for it. So thank you so much.
I have one more question for you. This will be our last one. And then you both can make final statements. This question is from Bishop-elect Elliot Somerville, and he is asking, how can we as current day individuals reclaim the wholeness and holiness of the meal cooking kitchen?
Ooh, oh, that is such a great question. I'm glad it's a great question to end on. The first thing I would say we need to do is stories. I would say, and so what I try to do with my own son, again, who's 3, and I probably have him do things that I wouldn't take pictures of for y'all to see how he is in the kitchen, because I just trust him because he's helped me enough in terms of his where he is near the stove and things of that nature. But when I cook with my son, I tell stories about his grandmother or his great grandmother he never got a chance to meet because she passed away before he was born. I talk about my grandpa. I tell stories about my day. I ask him about his day. I talk about a particular dish if I'm making that I know has a story revolved around it with respect to the research that I've done. I think we have to construct narratives. And in those stories, I believe we begin to reconnect to our own kind of histories and the ways in which our grandmothers and mothers and great grandmothers made a way out of no way. And I think keeping those stories alive really empowers us. And there's a certain kind of, my grandmother called it the anointing, is what she would call it, folks that would have in that space and in those kitchens. And those women had it. I mean, they would make miracles in that space. And so I believe some of this is really lifting those stories up and seeing them for who they are as individuals and the skills and the talents and culinary acumen they brought to that space, rather than just people who were just cooking our food, right? They were doing more than that. They were trying to make sure that they were provisioning us and actually really doing what I talk about with respect to soul food, the preservation and promotion of community. And so I believe one of the best things we can do is to try to cook and tell those stories. And that takes more time. And so obviously you can't do that all the time, but maybe you do that a couple of days a week. You're like, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to set time as a family. We're going to talk about this stuff. And we play music when Isaiah and I do it. And it becomes a ritual. It becomes a ritual. And funnily enough, I got profiled for a magazine for my university, and they asked me I had any pictures of me cooking, and I don't, but I had tons of pictures of my son, and so that ended up using pictures of him as opposed to me in the story, because for me that's what I want to pass on to him is those stories. Oh, that's such a great question, and I think again something that's really, really important for us to try to recapture.
Bishop Flunder, and I know because she's somewhere writing a book, and I know it has to do with the kitchen and grandma and all of the stuff we're talking about. So yes.
And so the preface, which I have shared with our family, Dr. Carter, has to do with when my grandmother took me to Fort Worth. I was a little skinny little girl, really, really thin, and I was the kind that didn't want to eat. I grew up in the era of TV dinners. And my mother was a working mother, and it's just some of the worst food that you ever had in your life. It's just terrible. Swanson TV dinners were just absolutely horrendous. And I did not like them, and I would not eat them, and I stayed in trouble because I would not get up. I could not get up from the table until I completed my meal, and so I would end up going to sleep at the table because I didn't want to eat it. And long story short, my grandmother took me to Fort Worth, Texas, where my auntie Beulah May Berry and my grandmother Bessie Lee Hamilton and a bunch of church women from the Baptist church on the corner came and sat around and had a cook-a-thon. And I have to tell you, I was the go and fetch it person. Go over there and get some Irish potatoes. They used to call Irish potatoes. Go there and get some red potatoes. Go there and get those beans. Help us snap these beans. Well, honey, I had never in all the days of my life, I told you my mother was a good cook, but she's a working woman. And I had never in all the days of my whole life had any food like that. And I came to Texas one size. I left from Texas like two sizes bigger than I were. We stayed for a month. And I got so big so quick that they cut down one of their corsets and put it on me so that I wouldn't jiggle when I went to the church. They told me that they didn't want me to go to the church and jiggle. But the thing is, I never had anything that tasted not like that. And it was like, and what I wanted to lift up was the camaraderie around it. And while their hands were peeling potatoes and shucking corn and cutting greens down and all of that, there was this village thing that stuck in my mind. And I know that there's so many ways that you go with that thinking. There's so many ways I go with that. And in so many ways we miss it. And we need something like it to get us together, creating something for all of us, bringing our best. If you do better corn and I do sweet potatoes, and if I do better greens and you do beans, that we bring and we come together and make a meal. It's such a theological concept to me of inclusivity. You bring yours, I bring mine, we share with one another, we teach the children to fetch and carry, and we create community. We are bereft of that. I think that your book can tie together in so many ways what that bereavement really is in our community and can help us to thrive. Thank you so very much for being with us right now during a time when families are broken and afraid. Both of those things are going on. It's going to be vitally important that we find our way and get our feet under somebody's table and start taking care of one another. God bless you, Doctor. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Christopher. Don't leave us. We want to give away the book. We want to make sure that you put hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers while we do the announcements so that you can make sure that you win the book. The book, again, is called The Spirit of Soul Food, and it is race, faith, and food justice. As he said, there are some recipes in the book, and there are some ways forward as it relates to food justice. And it's a wonderful line through that book that talks about how all of this and the underlying penning theme of everything is racism and white supremacy. And so it's just an excellent book. And so I want you all to purchase the book as well. If you don't win it today, you can purchase that book. And if you look inside the chat or the comment section of YouTube and the chat of Beyond the Gatekeepers and Bishop Yvette A. Flunder's page, you will see how you can purchase the book and get it at a discount. Don't go to Amazon. Go through the link that is provided so that you can receive the discount to get the book, which was provided to us by Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter. And so again, we say thank you to all of you that have joined us on tonight. We appreciate you so much. We ask that you continue to share this conversation, right? So you know that it goes up, but it stays on Facebook. Continue to share. Somebody needs to hear about how this is going. Somebody needs to hear this conversation about food justice. Somebody needs to hear the conversation about Black veganism. And so I hope that you will share it with friends and family. Thank you so much. And we're going to go right on to our next announcement. Bishop Flunder.
Thank you so much, Bishop-elect Vanessa. And again, thank you, Doctor. It was just absolutely wonderful, Dr. Carter. I want to encourage you, those of you who are supporters of Beyond the Gatekeepers, you definitely support with your time. I'm going to ask you and encourage you to also support with your treasure. We want to continue to expand with new opportunities coming up. I'm hoping very soon that we can broadcast even more widely than we are now. I'm going to encourage you to give. As Spirit moves you, you can give via Cash App to $TFAM Annual, TFAMANNUAL, or to PayPal, www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. If you've been blessed, if you've been helped, if you've been encouraged, even in these tenuous times, give. And let's do more together than any of us could do alone. God bless you is my prayer.
Have we got good religion? Save the date, July 12th through the 16th, 2022. The TFAM Leadership Conference will be in Phoenix, Arizona at the Biltmore. We're thanking and praising God for our ability to come together. Our presiding prelate, you all know, is Bishop Yvette A. Flunder, and we are going to Phoenix, Arizona, to the Biltmore, Arizona Biltmore Resort. The room rate is $119 per night. Registration is now $125. It ends July 1st. And on-site registration is $150. We have so much in store. You can look on the website and you can find out what is going on, the schedule. You can also find it on the app. Download the TFAM app and you'll be able to find it. We are so looking forward to this conference that will be held July 12th through the 16th. Make sure that you register and book your hotel. God bless. Thank you, Bullet in Flight Radio. We appreciate you, Dominic, and all the good work that your company is doing. And so now we have Lifestyle Global Properties, and they are presenting Donate to Your Church. Give to your church while accomplishing your goal of home ownership. Lifestyle Global Properties will donate 10% of the commission earned from your real estate transaction to your choice of COR, which stands for City of Refuge, or TFAM, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, in your name when you utilize their brokerage to purchase or sell a property, residential or commercial, in California or Georgia. Please look up Antonio Matier. That's Antonio Matier, Matier. Please look him up. And it is Lifestyle Global Properties. Lifestyle Global Properties. Thank you so much, Antonio. TNT Tuesdays, Tuesday night talks, RIM Fellowship United Church of Christ. Come for a RIM virtual experience where their pastor is Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams. They're inviting you every Tuesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for everyday real, relevant, Bible-led conversations. You can look them up on their website at www.rimatlanta.org. You can also find them on Facebook at Rim Fellowship UCC. You can find them on Instagram at Rim Fellowship, and you can find them on YouTube at Rim Fellowship UCC. Thank you, Bishop-elect Sonia, for your support. Nubian Flunder is the LAC and founder of the Healing Place Apothecary. She is the daughter of our presiding bishop. She has her own company and has for many years. Please go to her website at www.thp, which stands for thehealingplaceapothecary.com. That's www.thpapothecary.com, where you can find out about her skin products. Their wonderful skin products. I actually use Daily Greens and Rose Water. Make sure you make your purchase. Support Black businesses, please. And we have Sky Michelle's Teas and Things, where a kid is the boss. So go to www.skymichelle.com and you will find t-shirts there. You will find mugs. You will find all kinds of things. She has a collection of t-shirts called Dope Black, Faith t-shirts, YA Flunder motivational quotes, Kara motivational quotes, and she also does customization of t-shirts and etc. Follow her on her Facebook and her Instagram page at I Am Sky Michelle. That's at I Am Sky Michelle. Thank you so much. Support Black businesses again. And then we have Kara Solutions. Focus on your passion. Let Kara handle the rest. The founder is Susan A. Weberly, and she does remote production and video conferencing, admin and tech support. She'll do the heavy lifting so you can focus on your event. She does custom branding, show development, and training. If you want more information, you can email her at sue@kara-solutions.com to get a free consultation. You can also check her out on her website at www.kara-solutions.com. Thank you for your support, Pastor Sue. Support Black businesses. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, please do so. Please email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate your support. And so before we go, we want to give away that book. I hope you put in hashtag Beyond the Gatekeepers. And so if you did, then hopefully you are the one that will win the book tonight. Our winner is Deacon Ronnie Jordan. Deacon Ronnie Jordan, thank you so much. And congratulations to you. Please go to the Beyond the Gatekeepers page, and in our inbox, make sure you put your full name and address so that we can get your book mailed to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening. Please keep the people of Texas in prayer, as Bishop Flunder has already done, and their families on tonight. We appreciate your support, and by the grace of God, we will see you next week. Very much.